We are wrapping up Serial Killer September with stories from Jacksonville, Florida, of all places. Jacksonville has produced the third highest number of serial killers behind New York and California. That is according to a study that I just made up, but it's probably true. It just seems like there's a lot of strange people that live there. And it's like, I get it. Like, if you've ever been to Jacksonville, it just kind of exists, right? Like, it's just barely Florida. And so, like, it's not as cool as literally any other place in Florida. There, like, everything north of, like, St. Augustine is really not even Florida, if we're being honest. It's like an extension of Georgia or Alabama, kind of depending on where in the panhandle you are. Like, really, true Florida begins, like, after you get past Jacksonville. But whatever, I don't know. We've actually already covered a couple of other serial killers who lived in, were from, or actually killed in Jacksonville. There was Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole, who spent a good amount of time in Jacksonville, killed people there. We also talked about Ted Bundy, who had made a brief appearance in Jacksonville during the chaotic end of his run as a serial killer. So a lot of murderers, for whatever reason, living in Jacksonville. And we're going to look at it today. It's Our Weird World.
Our Weird World.
Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson. And yes, we are looking at 4 serial killers from Jacksonville, Florida. Looking at the stories of Paul John Knowles, Gary Ray Bowles, Paul Durousseau, and the tag team of George York and James Latham. So let's get into it. So we're going to start with George York and James Latham. Not a lot of info about their early lives, but George York originally was from Jacksonville. He joined the Army where he was stationed at Fort Hood in Texas, and it was there where he met James Latham. The two quickly bonded over their mutual hatred for black people, especially the ones in their mixed race unit. This is also because it was the 1960s, and that was just kind of, honestly, it's kind of par for the course, if we're being honest, especially in the South, even Florida, right? Because like I said, Florida, I saw this quote somewhere where it's like, Florida is the only state where the farther north you go, the more southern it gets. And that's like so accurate, right? Because, Miami, super Hispanic, party culture, all that, whatever, right? Tampa's like weird, where it's like, it's kind of just like a very buttoned up financial feeling city. They've got, still got a big Cuban population. There's still some, like, it's towing that line of tourism and whatnot, but for the most part, all that, like Naples, Fort Myers, that's all retirement. There's all kinds of retirement communities. Orlando, obviously, is all tourism. On the other side, you got your Cape Canaverals, all those other cities, Melbourne, Port St. Lucie, Palm Coast, Fort Lauderdale, all of that, just beaches and wealthy people and, not, more or less, not, redneck racists or whatever. But you start going farther north, Daytona, Big Spring Break, okay, St. Augustine, kind of a kitschy, touristy kind of place. And then you get Jacksonville, Tallahassee, Gainesville, kind of there back and forth a little bit. Panama City, Destin, Pensacola, like all trash. And it's very strange. So these guys are super racist, right? York and Latham. And they decide that they hate black people so much they can't even stand being around them in the military. So they go AWOL and travel back to Jacksonville. So when they arrived back in 1961, after beating a man senseless in Louisiana and stealing his truck to actually help them get there, the duo met two women visiting the city from Georgia and just decided that they were going to strangle them, steal their money, and then dump their car in a ditch. From there, they actually left town and drove up to Tullahoma, Tennessee, where they murdered John Whitaker and stole his truck. They drove Whitaker's truck to Illinois, where they ditched that vehicle and just started hitchhiking. And because this was the 1960s and everyone was still super trustworthy, they were picked up by a guy named Albert Reed, who immediately regretted that decision because he was quickly murdered and dumped in a creek. York and Latham then killed a gas station attendant in another Illinois town. They killed a guy in Kansas and then an 18-year-old hotel maid in Colorado. A month after that, York and Latham were arrested in Utah for violating the National Motor Vehicle Theft Act, which prohibited transportation of a stolen vehicle across county lines. This apparently made stealing cars okay as long as you just stayed in the same county that was on the license plate. I don't understand that law. But figuring it was the end of the line, York and Latham just basically started bragging to investigators about this whole big murder spree that they had just been on. And since they had murdered someone in several different states, they were then subject to each state's death penalty or whatever sort of sentencing was going on at that time. In Florida, Illinois, and Tennessee, had they been given the death penalty, they would have been taken to the electric chair. Colorado and Missouri had the gas chamber, but in Kansas, where they were tried for the murder of 62-year-old Otto Ziegler, they were facing a hanging because Kansas. And because Kansas was deemed to have the best punishment of the three options, these two men were hanged on June 22nd, 1965. And that, for some reason, that baffles me that hanging someone was still a thing in 1965. But also it's kind of during the civil rights stuff and black people. Anyway, our next story here is probably the most famous serial killer outside of Henry Lee Lucas to come out of Jacksonville. And that was Paul John Knowles. He was actually born in Orlando on April 17th, 1946, but he was constantly in trouble, always getting arrested for petty crimes. So it got so bad that his father actually gave him up to live in foster homes and reform schools because that's always going to end up working out. 100% of the time, always works. In 1974, as Knowles spent time at the Florida State Prison in Rayford, he began corresponding with a woman named Angela Kovic, a divorcee in San Francisco, who had ultimately fallen in love with Knowles because all the ladies love a bad boy. I don't get it, man. That's one of the things about these true crime stories a lot of times that I don't get. We saw this especially in the Ted Bundy episode, where it's just these women who fall in love with a prisoner. Ladies, have some self-respect. There's so many other dicks out there. You don't need the bad one. You don't need the bad boy. You can't change him. You can't do it. Leave him alone. Just leave him alone. Let him get out. Let him get rehabilitated. Maybe let him demonstrate it. And then maybe, but also maybe not. Anyway, it's fine. In Kovic's defense though, also, I'll give her credit. Knowles was a sickeningly handsome dude, a cross between Robert Redford and Ryan O'Neal, which was actually one person's real description of this guy, but he had better hair. And so if you're probably my age, you have no idea who Robert Redford and Ryan O'Neal are. But, he was just one of those guys who had just a real strong jawline, very soft eyes, just kind of like a normal normal nose, nothing distracting. It was fine, but then just a great head of hair, just that flowing, just brown locks. Now, look, some up close pictures of this guy. He's got some weird teeth. All right. I don't know. This is like, I don't get it. But from a distance, there's a couple of headshots of this guy where it's like, all right, I get it. Right. But shit doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter. Once Knowles ended up getting released from prison later that year, he ended up flying to California to be with Kovic. Knowles proposed and she accepted, but then just to show you what kind of decision maker Angela Kovic was, a psychic warned her of, quote, the entry of a dangerous new man in her life. And she took that to mean her ex-con of a fiance. And so she calls off the wedding and breaks up with him over what a psychic. It's, I mean, like, it works out for her, but God, come on, people. Distraught, Knowles makes his way back to Jacksonville and then just absolutely loses his mind. So it starts when he stabs a bartender during a fight. And although he was arrested and put in jail for this, Knowles actually picked the lock in his detention cell and just took off into the night. Shortly after his escape, he broke into the home of 65-year-old Alice Curtis, bound and gagged her, and then burglarized her home, picking up, as many valuables as he could. Alice actually ended up choking to death on her dentures while he was robbing her house. He then stole her Dodge Dart, but then just like whenever he made a quick stop, maybe it was like at a diner or something, like he realized that police obviously they already knew he had escaped and they were already advertising him as a wanted fugitive. So a few days later, Knowles was preparing to abandon Alice's Dodge Dart somewhere, concealed, when he spotted 2 children that he knew who belonged to some family friends of his. And thinking that they might see him and tell their parents, who would then tell the police, Knowles just decided, rather than fleeing the scene and just getting away from them, because kids don't know where anything is, Knowles decided to kidnap these kids, strangle them, burn their bodies, and then dump them in a nearby swamp. It's reasonable. The next day, he then met Marjorie Howie, who apparently just wasn't paying attention to all of the wanted signs that had been posted, and invited him into her apartment, where she was promptly strangled with her own pantyhose. A month later, Knowles traveled up to Ohio, where he met an executive of the Ohio Power Company. That guy got murdered. And at that point, Knowles actually abandoned the Dodge Dart and stole this guy's car, which he then drove to Nevada, where he shot 2 elderly campers for no real reason. He's just crazy at this point. Knowles then drove down to Texas, where he came across a stranded motorcyclist named Charlene Hicks. Knowles raped her, strangled her with her pantyhose, and then dragged her body through a barbed wire fence. Now, I don't know how you drag a body through a barbed wire fence. I'm guessing he was on one side of the fence and then grabbed her arms or legs or something and then just pulled her through all of the barbs, which realistically, right? Barbed wire fences, they're sharp, but they're not going to sever limbs or anything. You'll get some good gashes out of it. But this is just a dick move. He's just scratching up her body generally. And I don't know. It just seems strange. So after that, he goes on to Birmingham, Alabama, where he meets a hairdresser named Ann Dawson, where he stopped to get his hair cut because he has a smoldering rebel image to upkeep, right? And so, no, of course not. He murders this woman. He dumps her body in the Mississippi River. But also the part about him getting his hair cut by this woman might actually be true. I don't know. I don't know. That's just, for me, that's just funny. That's just a funny thought to have where he's already murdered a handful of people already. He's just driving. His hair's just constantly getting in his eyes. He's getting real frustrated. And so he just decides, okay, I got to get a haircut. And so he just goes to Birmingham, meets this hairdresser, and she cuts his hair. But then he's probably like, oh no, what if she sees the wanted signs? I have to seduce her and then kill her. And that's what he did. So by the middle of October, Knowles had killed 3 others in Connecticut and Virginia. And later that month, he was actually pulled over for a traffic violation in Key West. Like, this dude is just getting around. Knowles, who was still in the stolen car from the Ohio Power Company executive, also had 2 hitchhikers with him that he planned on killing when he was pulled over by the cops. The officer didn't even bother to check the license plate, didn't bother to actually read the identification card of the guy who was driving, and just let him off with a warning. Probably because he charmed him, right? So it's like, hey, officer, how you doing? You looking mighty fine there serving the people here of Key West. I appreciate you. All right. Like, I don't know why he's Matthew McConaughey all of a sudden. But then, and the police officer's like, oh my goodness, stop. And then just lets him off with a warning. It's just, oh God. Anyway, realizing though that he had really dodged a bullet here, Knowles had a change of heart, at least about the hitchhikers, and dropped them off in Miami. He then called his lawyer for advice on what to do. Obviously, the lawyer told him he needed to surrender and confess to everything, which I don't know what Knowles was expecting, right? Like, maybe he hired like some scummy lawyer who was just like, yeah, dude, just keep killing people. Just ride this thing out. Like, you're already screwed anyway. Go ahead and just get what you can get out of it. I don't know. Anyway, Knowles thought that was the dumbest idea ever, right? Like, no, of course I'm not going to surrender. That's stupid. So he did, however, like kind of meet his lawyer halfway and went over to his office and dropped off a taped confession of all of the murders and crimes that he had committed over the last several months on his like cross-country road trip / murder spree. On November 6th, Knowles met Carswell Carr in Milledgeville, Georgia. Carr invited Knowles back to his house where he was subsequently stabbed. Carr's 15-year-old daughter was also murdered during the attack. Knowles tried to actually have sex with this girl's corpse, but even he had a line that he couldn't cross and he couldn't do it. So I guess silver linings, right? Like, at least he's not that bad. Like, he'll have sex with you while you're alive, whether you want him to or not. But if you're dead, no. All right. Let's have some respect. All right. It's just funny. 2 days later, Knowles met Sandy Fox, a British journalist. The two spent the night together, tried to have sex, but Knowles couldn't perform because he was at a point where he couldn't enjoy sex with someone who actually wanted to have sex with him. Like, he could only do it if the woman was like, no, please don't do that, because that's a thing for some guys, apparently. So disappointed, Knowles leaves Atlanta where the two had met and then meets another woman named Susan McKenzie, who, in a crazy turn of coincidence, just so happened to be friends with Sandy Fox. So Knowles, he's doing his thing, and then he's like, all right, I am kind of horny, so I need to do this, but got to do it my way. So he puts a gun to Susan's head, demands sex. This gives him a mega boner. He's ready to go. But Mackenzie was like, no, fam, we're not doing that. She escapes and goes to the police, who chase him down and try to arrest him. Knowles, however, responds by greeting the officers with a sawed-off shotgun, which causes the officers to freeze long enough to allow him to escape. So a few days later, a woman named Beverly Maybe had the pleasure of receiving a visit from Knowles at her home in West Palm Beach. She didn't invite him. He just broke in. He kidnapped Maybe's sister, but then later dropped her off in Fort Pierce, several miles up the coast. And then the next morning near the town of Perry, a Florida highway patrolman recognized Maybe's stolen car and pulled Knowles over. So you're probably thinking, this is it. This is how the story ends. Huh. Oh no. During this traffic stop, Knowles fought with Trooper Charles Eugene Campbell, wrestled him to the ground, stole Campbell's pistol and patrol car, and then took him hostage because why not? You know? Like, I just, I, I can't imagine police officers train that much for someone to wrestle them and steal their car and take them hostage. But here we are, right? So Knowles, now he's just driving through Florida in a stolen patrol car. And he realized pretty quickly that, like, driving around in a stolen police car is probably going to get tracked down pretty quickly. It's going to generate a lot of unwanted attention. So he uses, like, he turns the siren on, turns the lights on, actually pulls over another driver and just, and takes Officer Campbell out of the car, takes his hostage out of the patrol car, hijacks this new car who, belonging to a guy named James Meyer. So he hijacks this car. Now he has two hostages, right? It's like, what is that conversation in the back seat like, right? Like, Meyer's got to be looking over at the officer and just like, how bad are you at your job, dude? Like, but also, if you're James Meyer, that's got to be the weirdest day for you, right? Because it's like, yeah, you had your car stolen and now you're also a hostage, but it was done by a guy who pulled you over in a cop car. And the officer that the car belonged to is handcuffed and bound in the back seat because he is a hostage in his own vehicle, which is just nuts to think about. Just like the balls on this guy to do all of this is pretty impressive, right? So Knowles, he has James Meyer, he has Officer Campbell, tied up in the backseat of the car. Knowles drives up to Georgia and takes these two men into the woods and straight up executes them. However, by now, police are tracking them. They're closing in, and they had set up a roadblock in rural Henry County. But rather than give up, like the Georgia Highway Patrol just kind of expected him to do, Knowles smashed through the blockade of patrol cars, but then lost control of his car and crashed into a tree. He jumps out of the car and begins firing at the officers who were chasing after him before running off into the forest. However, he is being followed by several police officers. He's got dogs after him. There's a helicopter tracking him. And yet they somehow lose him. Get it. Like these forests and everything, they're pretty thick. It's kind of difficult to track him down. So he kind of gets away. Like, he finds a cabin, or not a cabin, but like he finds a hiding spot. And this random person who's just out in the woods, maybe hunting or whatever, he finds Knowles, corners him, and then takes him back to police. And where he found them, he found Knowles like outside of the perimeter. So like he had escaped police presence altogether, but didn't end up working. Actually, this guy took Knowles back to his home and called police, where they came and picked him up. Well, a couple months later, he's been in custody. The investigation's going on. And on December 18th, 1974, police were actually transporting Knowles back to the site in Georgia where he had executed Campbell and Meyer. But as they drove down Interstate 20, Knowles tried to grab the sheriff's gun in the in the driver's seat, which discharged in the holster. And while Knowles and the sheriff, who's driving the car on the interstate, are fighting over this gun, the accompanying investigator in the passenger seat, Ronnie Angel, turns around and shoots Knowles 3 times in the chest. And in all, Knowles, who was ultimately nicknamed the Casanova Killer, which perfect fit because he's got it going on, was credited with 20 murders. However, he claimed responsibility for a total of 35. All right. Final 2 stories, a little bit shorter here. We pick things up in 1994 when Daytona prostitute Gary Ray Bowles decided that just taking a bunch of dick wasn't enough for him, and so he needed to start killing people. He had been living on the streets for the last 2 decades after he had assaulted his alcoholic stepfather and run away from home. And when John Hardy Roberts offered Bowles a place to live in 1994, Bowles responded very reasonably by beating and strangling this guy to death. You get it, right? Bowles went on to murder 5 other men across Florida, including one in Jacksonville. Each time, Bowles would approach a man, offer him maybe like a complimentary mouth hug. And then at some point during this transaction, he would beat and strangle them before stealing their credit cards and leaving the scene. Bowles was eventually arrested for the murder of Walter Hinton, where he confessed to the previous 6 murders, and he was given the death penalty, blah, blah, blah. Our final story here is of Paul Durousseau, who was a member of the Army and spent time stationed in Germany. In 1997, while stationed at Fort Benning in Georgia, he was arrested for kidnapping and raping a woman, but the charges were eventually dropped. 2 years later, he ended up being court-martialed for possession of stolen goods and was dishonorably discharged. So after being discharged from the Army, he moved down to Jacksonville with his wife and 2 kids, but he struggled to maintain a job, often argued over finances with his wife, which makes sense because he's not doing anything to help. But because it's Florida, even though he was a convicted felon, including a domestic battery charge that he had received in 2001 after he popped his wife during another argument over money, as well as another rape charge against a different woman in Jacksonville, this dude got a job as a school bus driver. Florida. What are you, like, there's got to be better ones, right? There's got to be better alternatives. Not a convicted rapist driving a school bus in Jacksonville, of all places. By 2003, Paul had left the school bus job. Everything seemed fine. And he was working as a cab driver for Gator City Taxi. On his first day on the job, he picked up 20-year-old Shawanda McAllister, drove her to her apartment, where he then forced his way inside, raped, and strangled her. When police arrived at the scene, they noticed that it looked almost identical to a murder that they had discovered 8 days before. A little over a week after the murder of Shawanda McAllister, 2 more bodies were found in a ditch. Both women had last been seen with Paul Durousseau, so you see what's going on here. Finally, on June 17th, 2003, Paul was arrested and charged with 5 counts of murder and given the death sentence. Authorities later learned that Paul had committed his first murder less than a month after the rape charge back in Fort Benning. If you're also wondering whether or not that first murder was strangled, she was. There's a pattern here. In 1999, he had actually killed a woman named Tyresa Mack and stole her television. This was likely the stolen goods that he was ultimately court-martialed for. And it was this murder that he was, formally convicted of. And that is the end of today's stories. All right, Jacksonville serial killers and just another serial killer September in the books. Is this number 4? Number 3? Number 4. This is season 4. Wow. That's crazy, right? No. Yeah, no. 2020, 2021, 2022. Yeah, man. The 4th edition. Wow. I've been doing this way too long. So sad. Anyway, let's recap and see what we learned today.
What did we learn?
Number 1, Jacksonville, Florida has attracted, birthed, just had a lot of action when it comes to serial killers. No idea why. I mean, it is a very large city. Like, in terms of, like, just kind of the way that their government has done things, like, pretty much the entire area of Duval County is just also the Jacksonville city limits. And so it's just a really huge place. And so big population, a lot of land. And so the bigger, obviously, the more opportunity there is, I guess, for all of that. Number 2, A lot of strangling, a lot of raping and strangling. Not a lot of shooting, not a lot of stabbing, just a lot of raping and strangling. I don't know if there's a connection there or just, kind of correlation there. And then number 3, not anything recap related, something new. Jacksonville, because of this specifically, honestly, Jacksonville became the setting for my second fictional book. It's basically a diary form of a serial killer and just his descent into madness. It's called 1997, The Diary of Robert Caleb Finley. Takes place in Jacksonville, talks about, basically his own firsthand account of why he decides to start killing people and then how he does it. And then what happens? Ooh, who knows? Anyway, that's that. But, yeah, I don't know. If you want to check it out, go to my website, johnhensonwrites.com. Next week on Our Weird World, we are into October, which means it's a 4th year of some spooky Halloween themed stories. God, I'm telling you right now, September and October are the easiest months to plan for because I already know what I'm going to be talking about. So it's going to be 5 weeks. We have 5 Mondays in October. So I guess a bonus episode. I don't know. But we're going to be talking about aliens. So we'll have an episode on encounters, but we're also going to do one on people who claim to have been contacted by aliens. Woo! We're also going to do some stories on some ghosts, some monster sightings, and then we'll wrap it up with some stories of demonic possession. So we're covering all kinds of spooky Halloween scary characters next month. So I'm sure you're all excited for that. But that is going to do it for today. Thank you so much for continuing to listen. Keep telling all your friends about the show and keep it weird. Hopped up out the bed, turned my swag on, took a look in the mirror, said, "What's up? Yeah, I'm getting money, oh." Hopped up out the bed, turned my swag on, took a look in the mirror, said, "What's up? Yeah, I'm getting money. Oh." Turned my swag on. It's my turn, now turn it up. Yeah. I put my team on, then my theme song. Now it's time to turn it up. Yeah. I got a question. Why they hating on me? I got a question. Why they hating on me? I ain't did nothing to 'em but count this money and put my team on, got my whole clique stunting. Boy, what's up? Yeah. Boy, what's up? Yeah. When I was 9 years old, I put it in my head I'ma die for this gold. Boy, what's up? I'm back again. I know a lot of y'all thought I wasn't coming back. Yeah, I had to prove them wrong. Got back in the studio and came up with another hit. Yeah. I told the world my story, the world where I'm from. SouljaBoyXL.com, boy. What's up? Yeah. Now every time you see me spit, every time you hear me rhyme, every time you see me in your state of town, say what's up. Yeah. Hopped up out the bed, turned my swag on, took a look in the mirror, said what's up. Yeah, I'm getting money.